Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce the webinar on the Digital CMC CERSI, where we will be sharing the work in progress we have made so far in our project. Just before we begin, a few quick housekeeping points. So this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand shortly after today's session. We will run for approximately 60 minutes. And just a reminder that today is session 1 of 2. So our second webinar takes place on the 11th of May, and we would love to see you there as well. So you can register using the QR code on the screen, but I will also share that later again. So we have 3 speakers presenting today. So my name is Daniel Markel. I'm the CERSI lead and associate director at CMAC here at the University of Strathclyde. And I'm delighted to be joined by 2 excellent guest speakers. So first, Mandy Batwal-Shagade, Interim Deputy Director of Standards and Compliance at the MHRA, and Caroline Gordon, Senior Director and Group Manager of CMC Regulatory Affairs at AstraZeneca. So between us, we bring together perspectives from academia, regulation, and industry. And that's very much at the heart of the CERSI and what it is about. So hopefully you will find the different perspectives today of interest. So today's agenda covers 5 items. I will open with an introduction to the Digital CMC CERSI, our aims and drivers behind it. Mandy will then give us an MHRA perspective on the CERSIs and the broader context for UK regulatory science. I will then follow up with a more detailed overview of our outputs and the work we have been doing. I will then hand over to Caroline, which will share an industry perspective focusing on the impact and importance of digital predictive tools in the CMC environment. And before we then close, I will briefly summarize today's session and also provide some thoughts on how you can get involved. And as I said before, we will then have around 10 minutes for questions. So just a reminder, please do submit anything via the Q&A chat as we go. So for sure, you have some interest on digital CMC, as otherwise I would expect you wouldn't be joining us today. So why does digital transformation in CMC matter, and why now? So what we are witnessing at the moment is a wave of innovations in drug discovery. The number of AI-discovered molecules entering clinical trials has grown exponentially, from just 1 in 2014 to 67 in 2023. And early data suggests that these AI-designed drugs achieving success rates of 80 to 90% in phase 1 and 2 trials, compared to historical industry averages of about 40 and 60 to 65%. Of course, we need to wait for more data to confirm this, but it indicates a remarkable shift. But there's a challenge. As the drug discovery accelerates, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, so CMC now sits on the critical path. If we can't develop and manufacture these new medicines fast and more efficiently, we create a bottleneck that slows patient access to treatments. There is also an urgent sustainability imperative. The pharmaceutical sector currently emits 55% more CO2 than the automotive industry. And CMC development can generate up to 100 kilograms of waste for every kilogram of product. And underpinning all of this is a regulatory challenge. So how do we ensure that our framework keeps pace, remaining agile and fit for purpose, while we continue to safeguard safety, quality, and efficacy, and manage the risks that come with AI and other emerging technologies? And so these are some of the key questions that we are asking us as a CERSI. So we are now really moving from that vision of digital CMC to the implementation. So we see across academia, industry, and regulatory agencies, digital tools for medicines development and manufacturing have been developed and are also now demonstrated at pace. Some industrial and regulatory examples include applications of digital twins and AI to design continuous data compression processes, and also examples to show real-time control of production lines. So here we are do not have just the hypothetical future applications, they are happening now. As these technology is mature, we are also seeing a deeper integration of automation, robotics, and AI working together. So we are realizing a lab of the future that is fundamentally transforming the way we develop and manufacture and control medicines. The base of this change is significant, and it brings both enormous opportunity and equally significant responsibility. So we need to ensure that these tools that we develop are credible, transparent, and trusted by regulators, industry, and also, in the end, the patients. But how widely are these digital tools actually being used, especially when it comes to regulatory submissions? So last year, we conducted a global survey with 26 respondents from across the pharma industry. Collectively, those respondents had around 300 digital tools implemented across their organization. But only fewer than 15% of those tools are currently being used to support regulatory submissions. Now, not every tool is necessarily relevant for our regulatory context, but even if we account for that, the gap is significant. So there is clearly a vast untapped potential. So the question is, what is holding back adoption? And so our survey and also wider discussions with our stakeholders paint quite a clear, consistent picture. On the driver side, companies are clear about the value they see, and the business case is well understood for that. So digital twins and mechanistic models are being used to increase process robustness, deepen process understanding. AI and advanced analytics are driving efficiency gains and reducing development times and material use and costs. But on the challenges side, there are equally consistent barriers. So respondents indicated regulatory expectations are not yet harmonized across the regions and creating uncertainty for companies operating globally. And there also remains still a fundamental question of what is actually acceptable of these digital tools. Whether that is model, credibility, data requirements, or the way digital evidence is documented and presented in a submission. So closing that confidence gap is one of the central purposes of the digital CMC CERSI. So we are building on that vast landscape of these digital tools, and we developed a clear and ambitious aim. So we're working to unlock the full potential of existing digital tools for industry, for regulators, and ultimately for patients and the wider society. We're doing this critically in a pre-competitive space. So that means that we're bringing together industry, academia, and regulatory agencies to work openly and collaboratively. So we're taking away the commercial barriers that can get in the way of these discussions. Our goal is to establish a forward-looking regulatory framework supported by a suite of practical enablers. So including case studies, digital CMC sandbox, training programs, and our virtual regulatory assistant. As at the heart of this is a confidence question. So industry needs confidence that digital submissions will be received and evaluated consistently. Regulators need confidence that the tools being submitted are credible, transparent, and well documented. So when both sides have that confidence, we create the condition for substantial and sustained increase in the use of digital tools. So without compromising on the quality, safety, and efficacy of medicines or on patient well-being. The CERSI is underpinned by a strong and diverse network spanning academia, industry, and regulation. So we are led from CMAC, an Advanced Medicines Manufacturing Research Center based here at the University of Strathclyde. And we're working in close collaboration with the Montfort University, the Glasgow School of Art, CCDC, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, BMS, GSK, and Siemens. And of course, also the MHRA. Beyond our core partners, we are actively engaging with a growing number of regulatory agencies, pharmaceutical companies, and professional bodies from around the world. The network is expanding, and the broad engagement is a vital part for how we ensure the work we do is relevant and generates impact in the future. So with that short introduction, that brings me now to our next speaker, and I'm delighted to hand over to Mandy. So as mentioned before, Mandy is an interim deputy director of standards and compliance at the MHRA, and she will now share the regulatory perspective on CERSIs and the broader context for the UK regulatory science. So Mandy, over to you, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniel, and hello everybody. So I'm going to give you the MHRA perspective, as Daniel has said, and give you some insights into why this initiative has come about. So we're talking about regulatory science, but really what is that? It's to really help us develop the tools, the standards, and the evidence needed to support regulatory decision-making for innovative medicines and healthcare products. And that's what we're doing, really looking at that evidence generation to support us in that decision-making and the best way to do that. Now, it needs to continue to evolve alongside advancing health technologies. The rapid pace of development that we're seeing right now, even in the space of AI and digital transformation, as well as the different types of products coming through and technology evolving, through this partnership approach to help us have that real evidence base to look at of how we can support and where guidance really needs to sit. And so the reason these CERSIs came about was to establish this space for not just the regulators, but academia, industry, and our innovation partners to collaboratively address these new approaches to regulatory science. What's missing? What evidence do we need? And how can we approach it together? And like I said, the objective is to generate the evidence and tools to support robust regulatory decision-making. So if as a regulator we know what we're looking for, we can explain that to those working in industry. It's really clear, and some of the aspects that Daniel's mentioned already in his slides about that clarity that's needed in the approaches to be taken. So our CERSI program has been running for a while now. It's actually the first of the CERSI programs, and across the whole different CERSIs, this collaborative work has taken place in a number of different areas, and it's already generated some early outputs which are supporting regulatory innovation. So some of the things that they have began to come out with is looking at development of regulatory tools and frameworks, so roadmaps and portals in that regard. Looking at new approaches to evidence generation, looking at either real-world evidence, patient-reported outcomes, and computational approaches as well. Looking at regulatory capability and training, so looking at training platforms, regulatory sandboxes, and stakeholder engagement. And essentially what a sandbox is where you're trying to develop a new concept, and the current regulatory framework as it exists may need to flex slightly to make that concept work. And how can you do that in sort of a controlled, simulated environment, working with the regulators and others together to see how we need to evolve this. One of the things we tend to hear is regulations aren't evolving as quickly as the technology is, and guidance isn't coming as quickly. One of the other sides is the best guidance comes if we've got the evidence to support it. So how can we generate that evidence in a way that the guidance and regulations can be helpful? And then also through international collaborations and standards. So there's been contributions to ISO standards or other global regulatory alignment and policy development from the CERSIs. So where we are with the CERSIs currently, so there's been 7 CERSIs in total, and this is one of them. And the initial funding period concluded in March 2026. And the CERSIs will be providing their reports and summarising their outputs and insights. And we've got these webinars which are there to educate others on some of those outputs. And some of the agency's reflections on the programme is the pilot has definitely demonstrated the value of collaborative regulatory science across the UK innovation ecosystem, not working in silos. How do we tackle this together? What's needed, and how can we work best in this environment? The programme's also highlighted the importance of structured governance and sustainable funding and strong strategic alignment across partners as well. And what, as an agency, we're doing is reviewing these lessons to inform the next phase of the CERSI initiative. So that's just a very high level of what the MHRA's perspective is on the CERSIs. A few perspectives just working with the digital CMC CERSI. Now, Daniel's already mentioned the need for it and the drivers for digital transformation, not just from an acceleration perspective, but a sustainability perspective as well. Working now with our inspector colleagues as well, we know a lot of the thoughts that came back in the survey were, how is this going to be reviewed, not just from a submission perspective, but also from an inspection perspective. And we, our inspectors also work on the PICs, with PICs through the GMP guide, and we know that revision is taking place of Chapter 4 and Annex 11, which is computerized systems, and of course the new Annex 22, which is artificial intelligence, of both the PICS and EU GMP guides. These have been drafted by the Inspectors Working Group of the European Medicines Agency and PICS in order to maintain global alignment of standards and achieving the same time assurance for the highest quality. As regulators, and I know as our inspectors do, this is how we ensure harmonisation of standards which enable reliance and recognition of each other's work. And we as the MHRA, we continue to collaborate with our key partners and international regulators and industry groups as well. And that's why things like the CERSI are so important, and generating that thinking ahead to be able to feed into some of this work as well. And beyond submission, some other thoughts. I know some of the thoughts we've had is how, from the survey that was shown by Daniel about using these tools within submissions and regulatory submissions, it was interesting to look at those slides and the graphs and seeing that actually there's digital tools being implemented, but not necessarily for submissions. And whilst there's a submission element to consider as well, there's probably also other elements where it could be used. For example, in the quality management space, can get deviation management, for example, manufacturing issues where modelling may be used to assess impact with respect to compliance with specifications or shelf life. So it's important that we capture all elements of where it could be being used and where might be best to take this thinking going forward. I'd just like to thank you, Daniel, for your work and support on this, and I look forward to the next part of the presentation, which I believe is from Caroline.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mandy. Much appreciate your valuable contribution to this today and providing an MHRA perspective. So we're now coming back to myself, and I will now talk you through some of our key outputs that we have been generating over the last year in particular. So we focused on two core elements. So first, kind of co-creating together with our partners an evidence-based framework that reduces the risk and accelerates the adoption of digital tools in regulatory submissions. And second, kind of a regulatory toolbox for digital CMC, so designed to enable the confident and compliant use of models across the industry. So to deliver this, we have developed that regulatory lifecycle framework, and that is supported by 4 key enablers. So that includes case studies that provide real-world examples, Vera, our AI virtual regulatory assistant, and training program for developers, regulators, and also other stakeholders more broadly involved in digital CMC and regulation. And then alongside sits also a digital CMC sandbox, so a safe shared environment where tools can be tested and evaluated collaboratively. So before I talk you through some of the outputs in more detail, I want to briefly acknowledge kind of the regulatory landscape that we are operating in, because it's evolving rapidly, as you have heard just now from Mandy, but also many other regulators are looking at this, obviously. So it provides an important context for everything we need to do, and we really want to align and consider new draft guidance, new kind of new complete guidance as well, and any other legislation that comes out. So across the globe, regulators and professional bodies are actively developing this, especially looking at AI and digital tools in medicines development and manufacture. The volume especially over the last 18 months has been kind of the volume of new guidance emerging has been significant in that space, and that's really also something that we have been actively reviewing and discussing within the CERSI. While the specific requirements may vary between different regions, there are some clear and consistent kind of themes running through most of the guidance. So a clear definition of context of use, risk-based approaches to evidence generation of data and models, lifecycle governance, ensuring tools remain fit for purpose over the entire lifetime, and there's a strong emphasis on data integrity, transparency, and explainability. That said, it's also worth noting that some of the new draft guidance introduced very specific requirements or place constraints that could, if not carefully consider, slow innovation. So navigating that tension between enabling innovation and ensuring appropriate oversight is one of the key challenges in the field faces at the moment. So that brings me now to one of our central outputs, so that Digital CMC Regulatory Life Science Framework, or DCRL framework. So working closely with our partners, we have been developing this framework by building on and consolidating existing standards and guidance from across the globe. So inputting ICH and ICH guidance and also guidance and white papers from global health authorities. It is designed to be applicable to all digital predictive tools, so including kind of mechanistic, knowledge-driven models, data-driven models like AI and machine learning. Or it could also be a hybrid of these two, which we also see a lot more these days coming through as well. The framework has 3 different layers. So at the foundation, we build on the 5 core AI principles drawn from supporting regulatory guidance, so in particular also from the MHRA. And that covers safety, security and robustness, appropriateness, transparency and explainability, fairness, accountability and governance, and contestability and redress. The middle layer is our DCRL workflow itself. So it's a structured 4-stage process that guides the development and regulatory assessment of a digital tool. So from concept and risk analysis through to development and verification, to validation and uncertainty quantification, and finally regulatory use and lifecycle management. So this is very strongly building as well on published and published guidance and workflows from, for example, from the ASME, but also from the new draft guidance from the FDA on AI for medical products. And so we are trying to incorporate all these different perspectives into one consistent workflow. So running across all 4 stages is a continuous credibility assessment, so ensuring that the tool remains fit for purpose throughout its life cycle. And sitting above the workflow are the 4 key enablers. And so this is where a majority of our work is happening. So we are creating and delivering training, creating case studies, creating a digital sandbox, and Vera, which kind of all of these tools bring the framework to life in practice. So these 3 layers, we see them as an integrated and comprehensive approach to digital tool development and also with regulation in mind from the outset. So just talking a little bit more, especially about these enablers. So how do these 4 enablers actually work together? So who do they serve? So for example, a model developer in industry needs to know, have I built this tool to the right scientific standard? Have I documented it correctly? And will the regulator in the end accept it? So that is where the scientific and regulatory training comes in, giving developers the knowledge and the language they need from the very start of the development process. But also making sure that regulators and any other stakeholders have access to the same training to understand actually how are the different people involved in the process trained. As the tool matures, the case studies provide real-world reference points. So they answer questions: what does a well-documented digital tool actually look like in practice, and to give industry teams concrete examples to draw on when preparing submissions. So this ideally should reduce uncertainty and build confidence on both sides. The Digital CMC Sandbox then provides the space to test and challenge the model. So a safe environment where developers and regulators can test tools. Underpinning all of this is Vera, so that's available at any point in the process to answer questions, so signpost guidance and support decision-making. So whether you're a developer asking about model credibility requirements, a regulatory affairs professional preparing a submission, or regulatory reviewing one. So Vera is designed to give kind of a consistent, reliable starting point. Now, let me tell you just a little bit more about the different case studies. So here, our starting point was to ensure broad coverage. So we deliberately selected case studies spanning different types of digital predictive tools, so knowledge-driven models, data-driven and AI models, and hybrid approaches that combine both. So we also ensured coverage across both drug substance and drug product, and selected examples with varying levels of regulatory kind of risk. So lower risk applications through to high risk models. So for each case study, we then applied the full DCRL TCRL workflow, so working systematically through all 4 stages, from concept and risk analysis through to regulatory use and lifecycle management, while the last part is obviously, I think, the one that we least covered so far. And critically, we assessed each model against every element of the framework in detail. So here we were again drawing from existing guidance from FDA, EMA, ASME, and MHRA to pull together all the different aspects and assess each model against every single element here. Some of these are applicable to all types of models, some are not applicable to all types of models, and that's also a big discussion that is happening within the CERSI here. Another core element of the CERSI is the training that we develop and deliver. So we have designed a structured program that works at multiple levels. So it starts from with a general CERSI training where we cover the framework and the digital tool credibility assessment. So more details, we provide more details behind what I was just presenting here. And then we have a kind of digital tools training that includes introductions to machine learning, model evaluation, explainability, and Python coding, and so forth. So we then also offer model-specific training directly to our 4 case studies. So for these different case studies that we have been covering, for each of them, we also develop a specific model with specific training with the application and the credibility assessment in mind as well. So we broadly designed the program to cover kind of target audience, to serve our target audience that covers industry regulatory affairs teams, regulators, and also researchers in industry and academia. So the goal is here consistent and shared understanding of expectations across all of the stakeholders. So turning to the digital CMC sandbox, this is a live environment for testing digital tools and developing code in a safe and structured space, so where we can then anyone who runs through the training can also access the models and can test them with different data sets, different settings for the models potentially as well. So this is particularly powerful in kind of learning and understanding the capabilities and limitations of that models. So the sandbox also displays then its purpose, its context of use, its risk. So it also provides all the information about the model credibility assessment itself as well. And it provides then real-time predictions that can be reviewed and also changed based on change on how the model changed by the user in terms of what kind of data is used and what kind of model type is used as well. So this gives developers and regulators a shared and transparent view of a tool's performance and credibility, which aims to build again the trust and underpin hopefully successful regulatory submissions. And finally, I just want to briefly cover as well Vera, so our virtual expert regulatory assistant. So it's an AI-powered assistant specifically designed for regulatory CMC space. So at the core, it acts as an intelligent kind of virtual librarian. So we give user access to more than 300 regulatory documents. So we curated them. We added metadata to all of these. And they cover essentially different standards, different scientific best practice papers, so peer-reviewed papers, guidance, legislation, and so forth. So what makes it particularly useful is that we can then also, because we added all that metadata, we can also filter the responses by region. So for example, we can select, I just want a response to a certain question from the FDA or from ICH documents. So whether you then need these, so essentially the response is tailored to that what is selected by the filter and to the question that you ask. So this that entire setup allows us to reduce hallucinations of the large language model here. So it cannot answer essentially any questions that go beyond that scope of documents that we provided. So if we ask something about the capital of a certain city, it won't be able to answer that because it's not in the documents, even though it would know that generally as a large language model. So it's not really answering from the open internet, it's only drawing from its curated set of selected regulatory documents. So with that, we want that the response is more grounded and traceable. So it also provides to each response, and it provides a reference to the document, and so everyone can then go back to that document and specifically look at that page where this comes from. So you can ask Vera, for example, what are the GP requirements for manufacturing? So very generic questions, but you can also ask much more specifically on specific requirements and guidance for stability testing, or what is shown on the screen here as well, credibility of a dissolution model for real-time release testing. So I hope I could give you kind of an overview of the CERSI, what we are doing so far, and in particular on these key enablers that we have been developing. So this, with our second webinar on the 11th of May, we will go into much more detail of each of these elements. So that will primarily focus on these outputs. So if you're interested in that, please do sign up for the second webinar on the 11th of May. But with that, I now wanna hand over to Caroline. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Caroline again. So she's a Senior Director and Group Manager of CMC Regulatory Affairs at AstraZeneca. And Caroline will now give us a kind of an industry perspective on the impact and importance of digital predictive tools in CMC. So Caroline, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Right, so the perspective I wanted to bring was, as Daniel's mentioned, the industrial perspective and the impact and the potential impact this CERSI can have on the CMC environment. So give you a bit of context. Industry has set the expectation. This is an extract from an annual report that's gone out to shareholders. So really within the shareholding community, there's an expectation that generative AI is going to make a major change to how we work. And this is across the whole of the pharmaceutical industry and different areas covered by that industry. So bringing that in towards what it might mean for CMC, really that changing business environment has an impact on us as people interested in manufacturing and control. So with the leaps and bounds that clinical are making in terms of how to process the data and how to get better at designing clinical trials, there's an increased pressure on the manufacturing side to keep up, to be able to supply those studies and to be ready to launch products. And as Daniel's alluded to in Mandate, there's really a lot of new technology and new tools emerging rapidly that we've got to find out how best to use. There's also, alongside that, increased complexity in terms of the product and process types that we're starting to use. So again, massive opportunity to bring clinical benefit, but they're really challenging to figure out how to manufacture in sufficient quantities that you can launch products. We also have the challenge of data proliferation. So the more things you can measure, the more data points you have to deal with. So you get the negatives as well as the positives that they have to start to manage. And then finally, and very positively, there's been a huge push to minimize waste and environmental impact over the last few years. So it's not just about simply make this product, let's make this in the cleanest way possible. So all of that is coming together to form a really increased focus on CMC, which is amazing as a CMC professional, but it also brings increased scrutiny. So that explains why we want and we're happy to be part of a CERSI that really focuses on CMC and the needs of CMC in this new digital world that we're all starting to live in. So thinking on a bit more on the why, the main cause of drug shortages is quality or manufacturing issues. And that is happening in terms of the quality system that Mandy was mentioning, as well as the initial development strategy. So it's once these things get into routine manufacture that you need to be able to do it the right way every time. So you need to have the ability to really control those processes appropriately. And then looking at the module 3 and the quality content that gets registered. Again, there's an understandable focus when agencies review this on the manufacturing and control, because we want to be able to make sure we can supply these products to the patient. So bringing it to digitisation, it's not in itself a new concept. We've had in the CMC space the ambition to do much more streamlined and digital manufacturing for many years. And it's really only now that I think some of the technology are starting to catch up with that ambition. But we do have a lot of learning from the years we've been working on these kind of concepts. So trying to do real-time release where you don't have to do as much finished product testing, continuous monitoring of the process and verifying it, all of the different quality by design and inline monitoring and PAT approaches, all coming together now with some of these new tools that are available to really start to optimize what we can do in the CMC space. But why are we not doing it already? Well, it was incredibly technically challenging to introduce some of this stuff for the first time. New ways of working always take longer to implement. So the more new things you tried to put in front of a regulatory agency, the longer it would take to work through the information. So there's that mutual learning curve that we've had to go on in the past. More effort and money needs invested up front to break through some of these energy barriers. And when, again, you're working in a new world, there's an inevitable lack of clarity in regulatory guidance and a genuine lack of experience on both sides. So you're sort of working through this new world together. And then the final piece was, again, lack of global harmonisation in the past has led to some blockers here. And they were harmonising eventually, but the time to get there, as everybody saw the thing from their own different perspective, it took us a long time to start to harmonise on some of these concepts. So basically it all adds up to change being slow. And we're now in an environment where change can't be slow. So what can we do? What can we learn from our past experience to make the new emerging tools be implemented more effectively? And we don't want to just do more and generate more and more information. We want to be targeted and prioritised, and we want to pull out the digital tools that are really going to help us move forward and get all the benefits that we want to get. Okay. So that's why we found the Digital CMC partnership to be a really important enabler for this transformation. And it's that sort of three-way partnership where you have the three different perspectives coming together. And we deliberately centred this one on CMC and didn't try and cover other areas and cross over into, so for example, the clinical or the non-clinical space. We've really tried to focus this on CMC and the needs of CMC, which are, I think, unique in some ways and are different to some of the things that some of the other areas of the pharma industry needs to be able to do. And so it's a really great way to bring the stakeholders together to really figure out what our common goals were and push them forward. The deep dive into some of these emerging concepts has really helped us bring out areas where we can work on future alignment and really where the issues might pop up, and really being able to talk to each other in a safe forum where we can be open and honest with about the issues that we're facing has been incredibly helpful. So the DCRL framework, I think, can really help to promote alignment on these general concepts and really work to try and address that harmonisation issue where lots of key opinion leaders are starting to write things down and starting to push out their views on what should be achieved in this space, including some draft regulatory guidance and some not so draft. So trying to navigate your way through these concepts into sort of shared framework is something that needs to be done, and that's where the DCRL framework has started to put some of those positions together. The training element of this has been really important because, as was mentioned earlier, a lot of these tools actually stay in the quality system because they're used for manufacturing. They're not necessarily going to end up being registered in the regulatory document. So it's important to make some of those concepts visible, but without having to file information that really shouldn't be filed. So really trying to get that benefit right of, we need to work this through, we need to make what we're doing visible to the people who need to help us regulate it, or visible to the people who are going to help us invent some of it, but we can't necessarily share it in the traditional way. So some of these, the sandbox opportunities and the different ways of interrogating information, are really a step towards being able to share more effectively some of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, as well as the stuff that eventually makes its way into a regulatory submission. And it's really about balancing, from our perspective, balancing those drivers for speed, quality, cost and sustainability with the genuine need for regulatory oversight and partnership to make sure that we can continue to manufacture these products and supply the patients. So really, we can share the best practice while it's still under development, and that's what we've been doing as part of the publications and the framework, is to start figuring out what the best practice is now, share it now, before all of the different regions have finalised their guidance, and we can start to try and harmonise on that before we've got to unravel separate guidances on all these different areas. So overall, I think it's been really successful attempt to tackle the main blockers that were perceived from our past experience. So those being harmonisation and access to training for all parties concerned. And then just want to emphasise the potential applications which are really end-to-end and throughout the life cycle. So again, this kind of thinking and framework approach helps people who are trying to even work early on in clinical to start thinking about the end game before they finished, or developing a product that's robust in the first place using the models and the digital tools, and then understanding how that's going to progress into a final product that will be supplied commercially. So on this slide, I've pulled out a couple of examples from the white paper that's about to be published, where we've taken the two of the case studies through the framework. So stability modelling example is already being applied throughout the development timeline, and is particularly important in the clinical trial phase, as well as the final marketing application, where you seek to optimise your shelf life at time of filing, or maybe even remove stability from the critical path. And then the other big area that has been looked at has been the digital twin. And again, digital twins have applications across the life cycle, as well as on that final release of the product. They can be hugely beneficial during development and accelerate drug development. So really, the digital CMC, these are just two small examples of where digitization and modelling is really going to impact the entire CMC space. And it's not just about the finished product. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and throw it back to Daniel.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I think that was a great perspective from industry, and to clearly see how that aligns also with AstraZeneca strategy, but also and more broadly with industrial strategy around the digital transformation and the benefits you really see there. Obviously, they're really well aligned with what we do, and I think Caroline has been involved from the outset when we started preparing the proposal for the CERSI, and I think that industrial perspective has been always of huge value for us to shape the program. So I now will kind of come to the end, and I just want to provide a brief summary and a bit of information how you can get involved with the digital CMC CERSI. So this slide just gives a snapshot of where the CERSI stands at the moment. So we have been really active over the last year to engage with more than 13 organizations now across industry, academia, and research. So we have kind of our key strategic partners, but we engaged with many more. And we also engaged with many more kind of regulatory agencies, so with the EMA, the FDA, PMDA, and Anvisa in Brazil. And across the program, we had 50 3 industrialists directly and actively involved in our regulatory research projects. So this is absolutely crucial for us to ensure we generate impact from the work we do, to share kind of learnings from the different stakeholders, and inform kind of our white papers, and hopefully also inform then future regulation with that. We are currently working on several key publications from the CERSI, so that's again across kind of together with all our stakeholders. We want to share the co-created framework and the case studies, but also share the outputs of the survey with the wider community as a publication as well. So in a relatively short period of time, I think we were able to build a substantial foundation that sets us up very well for the future, to tackle some of the future challenges in that space. So coming back to the survey, so if we also asked the respondents kind of what they felt was most needed to promote the wider adoption of digital CMC and AI tools. So clearly internationally harmonized regulatory guidance, so such as through ICH, came out the top, but followed closely as well by regulator-hosted workshops and trainings. And so that's really, I think these are really areas that we are strongly supporting towards ICH guidance. I think that takes time, but we are working on that with kind of providing an industrial regulatory academic kind of view with white papers, and hopefully that can inform that in the future, and working very closely with all of our stakeholders to develop the training program. So clearly there's appetite for global harmonization, and that really directly validates our approach on that pre-competitive collaboration. Now, before I close, I would like to share a thought on pace. So over the last months, I particularly looked at kind of the pace at how the technology evolves. I think it's just incredible how quickly new tools come now online and are used actually very broadly, very rapidly. I think it's one of the most important and challenging aspects of everything we have been discussing today and in the CERSI over the last year. So according to research that was just recently published in February, so the length of tasks that AI systems can autonomously complete is doubling every 7 months. If you look at current trajectories, by 2030, frontier AI systems will be capable of carrying out month-long expert-level projects entirely autonomously. That is an extraordinary rate of change, and I don't think we have been seeing this in the past. This will bring enormous potential benefits, but also equally significant risks. So for our field, I think this raises a fundamental question. How do we ensure that regulatory frameworks keep pace with the technology that is moving this fast? If guidance is always playing catch-up, we risk either holding back innovation unnecessarily, or we allow tools into critical processes before we fully understand the limitations. And I think this is exactly where we want to work, and precisely where I think a pre-competitive neutral space like the CERSI is so important. By bringing together regulators, industrial kind of end users with the pharma companies, digital technology providers, and academia in an open and collaborative environment, we can develop the shared understanding, the evidence base, and the frameworks needed to utilize these technologies safely and responsibly. And with that, I just want to share just a few points about how you can engage with the Digital CMC CERSI. So if you or your organization would like to get involved, so whether as a partner, contributor, or simply to stay informed, please, we would be delighted to hear from you, share, use our website, or directly get in touch with us via email using kind of the email address displayed here. We also please do register for our second webinar on the 11th of May. So here we will share much more details about the specific tools that we have been developing. Use essentially the QR codes here, I think, to get to these different links. Before we move to the questions, I particularly would like to thank Mandy and Caroline for the fantastic contribution to today's sessions, and also throughout kind of the CERSI for for the excellent work together with us. I also would particularly like to thank Ian Housen and Sarah Elizabeth for all their hard work in the background behind the scenes. You have not seen them yet, but they're sitting with me in this room, and they have essentially worked in the background to organize this event. So thank you very much. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to open the floor for questions. So I see we have several questions online. Happy to start with the first that showed up in the chat. Has there been any progress made within this consortium to address this diversity in global regulatory expectations, so harmonize on the perspectives and acceptance of the use of process models and filings across different regions of the world, including ROW, beyond FDA and EMA? So I can provide briefly some explanation on that. I'm not sure if anyone else, please feel free to jump in as well, Caroline or Mandy. So it has been one of our particularly kind of focus areas to look at all the guidance, engage with the different regulators. And I think that we have been also very much encouraged by the MHRA to do that, and also obviously by the industry, as it is a global challenge. So with the workflow we designed, we really wanted to bring in all different elements from different guidance documents across the globe, and that is something that we are continuously focusing on. So we're reviewing and discussing guidance that comes out across the globe. We're also sharing some of our draft white papers with regulators across the globe to get their input, to ensure that it's aligned also with their perspectives. And we're also looking for early input from other regulators as well on our work. So very much, it's very much a big focus. I think there's much more that needs to be done on that side, but I do think we are very well set up with the consortium we have now, and also expanding that consortium to do that. I don't know if Caroline or Mandy want to comment any further on that question.
Yeah, I can go in with that one then, Daniel. So I think you've actually hit the nail on the head, and we definitely see the CERSI as being almost that thought leadership space to help inform us as an agency and take those learnings to help us influence other areas, such as with our other regulatory partners and partnerships, and also these collaborations that we do have that inform guidance, such as ICH and PICS. They're very much done in partnership anyway. So actually, I'm sure other regulators have a similar challenge, just as we do. This is a global phenomenon that we're seeing in terms of technology. We know that pharmaceutical development itself is globally intrinsically linked. So however we can make sure that we have that harmonization to support is definitely welcomed.
Yeah, and I just would add, I think what we've done is put a really good foundation in place to have some of those conversations. So we can share, as you mentioned, Daniel, we can share the white paper with interested parties, but within agencies and industry. Once we've got a signed off position that we've all approved, we can all go out and start doing our networking. And I know MHRA are already active in that space. So I would think there'll be more to follow on this one.
Yeah, and that, just following up on that, I think we have lots of industrialists involved in the CERSI program who have a very big network across the globe. So they're involved in many other professional bodies like FPR or also in ICH committees and so, which really allows us to make those connections as well, and make sure that we are visible, that work we do is visible, but we also kind of get the feedback back to make sure that our work is shaped by kind of those discussions in those networks as well. So next question was on how can industrialists get access to Sandbox Vera new guidance trainings. So very good question. So we will at the moment we share a little bit of the information or details on the website. We have all of our industrial partners who are directly involved in the CERSI. And also CMAC-led partners have access to all the tools at the moment. The wider distribution of that, I think, needs a little bit more work in terms of It's more in terms of managing access and to make it scalable, especially for Vera, how to host that on the cloud. And so I think there's a little bit more work that needs to be done to make sure that that it's possible, but that also requires some more funding. So we're looking at the next phase of the CERSI for that. So at the moment, please get in touch if you have specific interests, and we can see if your company or organization already has access to that, and then it's pretty straightforward. Otherwise, we're also happy to explore that. So please do get in touch with us if there are specific interests. Then are there still any gaps you foresee that still need to be addressed? So my short answer is yes, but I probably leave others to answer that. If I can ask perhaps Caroline and Mandy both to respond first, perhaps to Caroline, to provide an industrial perspective.
We've got 4 minutes, so I'll try and keep it brief. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to do. We've put some really great foundations in place, but we've got to start getting these real world case studies out there, really digging deep and making sure that they work for everyone. There's going to be a very long debate about validation that I foresee that will need to happen. So there's a lot of that we've got the concept starting to emerge, then we need to do that deep dive into the detail and make sure that what we're trying to do works across the board. Or maybe even separate it out and say, you know what, one size doesn't fit all. We need to move towards that.
Yeah, and if I just add on to that as well, I completely agree, Caroline. That's what I was thinking. It's the case studies, it's the real, here's linking it to the evidence generation and to be able to speak to that to other regulators, as well as, oh, I can see this working in practice. I can see how that applies in this scenario. And actually, it can be quite a blanket term when we talk AI and digital tools, and actually the context matters and the application in specific context. And the criticality of that process that it's being used for is important too. So I think definitely the case studies that can help shape some of this further thinking.
Excellent, thank you. So I think with that, we will bring this to a close today. And I just would like to thank again Caroline and Mandy for their time and valuable contributions today and throughout the CERSI as well, and Ian and Sarah for organizing this. And I would like to thank all the attendees for today for joining. So please, if you have more interest in that, we will be hosting another webinar in a few weeks on the 11th of May. So please register for that to hear more details about what we have been doing. And with that, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Also.